Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 9. So today we're starting a new module. We're gonna be actually using some of the old concepts that we've seen in previous weeks, the idea of capital and social capital, to look at corporations, philanthropy, and this concept of the common good, which really underlies everything that I'm going to be talking about when I refer to corporations on TNCs and philanthropy or CSR. So let's go with it. All right, so just so you remember, we're going to reconnect the dots, so to speak, and we're going to think about social capital in these two different ways. This is something that, as all of you may remember, some of you may remember because you have used it in your presentations, there are two ways of thinking about social capital. One is through Putnam's concepts, and then this concept, and I've said this before, but it's worth repeating, it's really based on the theoretical underpinnings, the framework is based on this idea of liberal rationality. When I refer to liberal rationality here, I'm really talking about liberalism in the European tradition. So Adam Smith, Stuart Mill, John Locke, the idea that individuals are rational beings or should strive to be rational beings, right? And then therefore need to, in many ways, suppress their emotions when it comes to decision making. So this liberal rationality underlines the concept of Putnam when it comes to social capital, right? Because when he's thinking about voluntary associations, so what creates social capitals are social networks, and these social networks are composed of individuals that voluntarily associate with each other in this horizontal relationship. So a social relationship is intrinsically horizontal. Yeah. Therefore, the idea of trust, or really not so much as intrinsically. Sorry about that. It's not intrinsically. It's in essence horizontal, right? So in that way, it's the same conceptualization when we think about universal moral principles, right? The idea that human beings shouldn't do harm to other human beings, right? That's an aspiring universal moral principle, right? So that's the theoretical framework. I'm going to go with Putnam, and then I'm going to go with Bourdieu. So remember that then therefore, social capital, the idea of social capital, so value in society, in this value in these social networks, is gained through this idea of trust. And then trust, in essence, remember, in essence, so theoretical, conceptually, is horizontal and needs to be generalized, right? Because the idea of free will and is underlying the idea of trust. So I trust you on my own volition. Therefore, we too connect with other two people on a voluntary basis for the benefit of society at large, or of the group. Yeah. So in this sense, social capital will create social cohesion. So the more generalized trust, the more social cohesion, the more social capital a society, a nation state may have. So, and social capital is inherently good, right? Okay, now Bourdieu and others, but Bourdieu fundamentally criticized Putnam, and not so much directly Putnam, but really at this concept, really it's a criticism of liberalism that then later up, that whose byproduct is the idea of social capital. A new idea of new reconceptualization of social capital. So in that sense, Bourdieu is looking at these supposedly free voluntary associations, this horizontal conceptualization of social cohesion, and is unveiling vertical structures when it comes to society, right? In that way, the difference between Putnam and Bourdieu is that, well, in Putnam, social capital is historically static. So it's the same as morality. And that it's in essence should stay the same. you could have different viewpoints, but whenever you ascribe to a viewpoint, that viewpoint throughout history should stay the same or aspires to stay the same. Now, Bourdieu is looking at this and it says, not really, this social capital is not, it's not a universal aspiration, but it's historically and politically and socially contingent. So it is dependent on context and is therefore fluid and constantly changing. And therefore it has hidden horizontal structures. And remember that Bourdieu then unpacks the idea of capital and divides it into three main aspects or of sub features of capital. One is economic, which is the most straightforward, which is basically wealth accumulation. Cultural, which is embedded also with the idea of symbolic capital, right? Is the most symbolic of the three. And that basically is the idea that you gain capital through conforming through the cultural and symbolic values of those who have already accumulated the most wealth, therefore the ones who have the most social capital. And then social capital is those social connections that allow you to have economic capital. Yeah. So then these three subsets of capital are embedded, and they could be horizontal, but they are also vertical. While in Putnam, it's mostly horizontal associations. Yeah. So this is important because we are going to unpack corporate social responsibility of TNCs through Bourdieu's idea of social capital, right? So this mesh of economic, cultural, and social, and this especially it's important here that you remember the hidden vertical structures that you can see in social capital, right? So here we see a critique of Putnam that I think it's very telling for what we will be discussing in just a second, right? Basically questioning that social capital, social integration, which is the result of creating social capital in Putnam, that basically questioning that it's necessarily a good thing, right? And it could be argued that this social cohesion, what it's hiding, what it's masking, is the uneven distribution of social capital. These vertical structures within society that distribute and gain social capital by being intrinsically uneven, by being intrinsically unequal. And that's how you can reproduce social integration. And the reproduction of social integration creates social cohesion, which again, in and of itself, is not a good thing, according to the critique of Putnam and according to Bourdieu later on, right? So this is the dark side of social capital, right? And this dark side of social capital is better seen in the idea of corporate social responsibility within TNCs, transnational corporations, right? Because we can see how corporate social responsibility, which is the concept that transnational corporations, the TNCs, can do good, can be very profitable transnationally, and be responsible with their profits. So therefore having a social conscience, enacting a social conscience and enacting social justice, that these two things can go together. Now, if we unpack that, what is happening here, this corporate social responsibility, it's really the need for TNCs to acquire a new type of social capital. And why are they acquiring a new type of social capital? Because especially before before the global financial crisis, although this has been happening for some time before that, I would argue that in the 21st century, you can see this after the invasion of Iraq. But let's get out of that historical specificity and look at it in more of a bigger, broad picture, right? So we can move quicker. So at least that breakthrough counts for sure or it's more visible in the in the global financial crisis. Before that, some time before that, there was economic capital was matched with cultural capital. So doing well, doing good was equated with doing well. You didn't have to, it was assumed, it was taken for granted. So making money was a way of acquiring not only economic capital, but cultural capital, therefore social capital. And it was that chain was unquestioned, right? It was unquestioned. Come the global financial crisis, that change is questioned. Having economic capital all of a sudden didn't give you cultural or social capital, yeah? So therefore, TNCs see a need to reposition their value in society. And that's how you start seeing a lot of TED Talks talking about conscious capitalism, philanthrocapitalism, corporate social responsibility. It's a fairly new concept. And then this concept really is at the core of the so-called post or Westphalian debate, the idea of sovereignty and obligations. How in the post-Westphalian debate, it is understood that only states have sovereignty over the nation, therefore only states have obligations. In the post-Westphalian debate, basically post-GFC, or really in the 21st century, then a new, and this is at the core of corporate social responsibility too, is that really large transnational entities in a transnational networked world, and because of globalizations, these transnational entities, they have acquired national sovereignty, transnational sovereignty, therefore they need to have transnational obligations, right? So now the issue could be reframed as a problem of enforcing private responsibility when enough private authority has been gained. So it's not so much do they don't have, but can we enforce, meaning transnational bodies, or new transnational bodies, or even national bodies, can they enforce responsibility for private actors that have private authority? Yeah, so that's really the question. And in here, covering is really looking at that within that framework, right? Saying that really transnational corporations need to be held liable for human rights violations, basically for human rights violation, not that they perpetrated, but that the a state within which they work have perpetrated. So they're also liable for aiding and abetting, basically. So we need to, because they have great private authority in the actions of that state, because that state sanctioned their dealings, right? Because of that, then covering makes a case that they need to have some type of liability. The issue, again, and covering really talks about this in the article, is not so much the debate, which a version of an affirmative version to the question of should transnational corporations have responsibility. It's kind of really unquestioned. Most IR academics agree that they should have some type of responsibility. The question is really a problem of accountability, how it becomes impossible to make TNCs accountable. And an example of this is even with something as simple as paying taxes, how they can evade their social responsibility by avoiding paying taxes. And you have multiple examples of that. Microsoft, Facebook, have their legal structure in Ireland because that avoids them paying taxes in the U.S. where they reside, or where they where the political interests are too, right? So in that way, that's why it's really an issue of accountability. Yeah, not so much an issue of like, should they be liable or not liable? How can we make them accountable, really? Yeah. Because the problem is when you look through the lens of human rights violations, is that the host country, who is a violator, so the host country where these transnational corporations are, is the primary violator of human rights. But then the home country where the TNC resides have no control over the connections between the home country's human rights violation and the corporation. And even though you can find direct links, and an example of this, if you want to actually look into it, it's Shell and BP in the Nigerian Delta. And the different human rights violation paramilitary groups that popped up after Shell did an oil exploration in the Niger Delta, and how that was enforced, and how their oil exploration was enforced. How that link that was very clear and couldn't really nothing could be done about it, precisely because there is no concrete breach of international law when it comes to the transnational corporation, only to the home state, right? And so that's the curse. So accountability is really the question, right? So then that's why there is a dark side to CSR, because CSR seems to be a new way of simply acquiring social capital, once that the change between economic, cultural, and social capital is broken. Once that society past the Westphalian debate is questioning that economic capital is a sign of cultural and social capital accumulation. So I'm just going to show you an example of how further dig into this idea of how CSR has a dark side, has these vertical structures that we don't usually see questioned in public.
Corporate social responsibility, or CSR, is everywhere. And which company now doesn't have CSR? All the major banks that screwed America in the financial crisis and the world, that sold out our economy and tried to make a killing selling toxic mortgage products, and didn't come clean to the American people or regulators about what was going on, paid billions of dollars in fines for fraud. Almost all those banks, like most American companies, have CSR departments, and they'll go and they'll do some, they'll have shovels, they'll do something with shovels, they'll do something with some poor country, they'll go to some community, and they'll even teach like a financial literacy class, like don't fall prey to financial fraud of the kind that we perpetrated. This whole idea that you can sell kids poisonous drinks that give them diabetes while making a playground, that you can build the Dakota Pipeline or invest in the Dakota Pipeline while sponsoring a climate change gathering with your CSR, that you can, push for a healthcare system that only gives people benefits if they work 30 hours a week, thus tempting many employers to only employ people 29 hours a week, and then say you're in the business of empowering workers or being the best first job in America or whatever. The reality is many companies are trying to fight on both sides of a war. In their main operation, in their lobbying activities, they are pushing for an America that is merciless. And then, understanding the need to brand themselves, understanding the need to, soothe a little bit of the public anger in this age of rage, they give a little back. They throw some scraps at us. And what is so sad is that all too often
works. That's what he ended up saying. So really, this idea of CSR, you could think about it as a way of branding, right? Of rebranding the corporation. But it goes really, it could even go deeper. You can think about it deeper in a way of, again, reacquiring social capital. And at the crux of this issue is, first of all, the evolution of TNCs from objects. Basically, they were producer of goods that were related to stakeholders, and those stakeholders would consume some goods, right? To the more abstract notions of TNC as legal persons, as subjects, and therefore they are much more related now to stockholders, and stockholders are obliged by law. And in this relation to stockholders, TNCs are obliged by law to increase stock benefits, and even increase stock benefits beyond the stockholders, who could also be beyond the stakeholders, who could also be a stockholder, beyond their common good, right? So to put it sort of in plain English, TNCs evolved from making products that people will consume, that in theory were to benefit the people who were to consume these goods, to be mostly legal persons with abstract rights and no obligations, and no material obligations, whose sole obligation by law was to increase the profit of the stockholders, even if these profits would not benefit the common good in which they operated. And this is called externalities. So, and CSR is a way to rebrand problematic externalities, okay? And to really mask the externalizing drive of TNC. And I'm gonna show you a little video about the very idea of externalities now.
To whom do these companies owe loyalty? What does loyalty mean? Well, it turns out that was a rather naive concept anyway, as corporations are always owed obligation to themselves to get large and to get profitable. In doing this, it tends to be more profitable to the extent it can make other people pay the bills for its impact on society. There's a terrible word that economists use for this called externalities.
An externality is the effect of a transaction between two individuals on a third party who has not consented to or played any role in the carrying out of that transaction. And there are real problems in that area, there's no doubt about it.
Running a business is a tough proposition. There are costs to be minimized at every turn. And at some point, the corporation says, let somebody else deal with that. Let's let somebody else supply the military power to the Middle East to protect the oil at its source. Let's let somebody else build the roads that we can drive these automobiles on. Let's let somebody else have those problems. And that is where externalities come from, that notion of let somebody else deal with that. I got all I can handle myself.
A corporation is an externalizing machine in the same way that a shark is a killing machine. Each one is designed in a very efficient way to accomplish particular objectives. In the achievement of those objectives, there isn't any question of malevolence or of will. The enterprise has within it, and the shark has within it, those characteristics that enable it to do that for which it was designed.
So the pressure's on the corporation to deliver results now and to externalize any cost that this unwary or uncaring public will allow it to externalize.
Right. So this externalizing drive of the TNCs, it could become, it needs to be rebranded. And it used to be rebranded by philanthropy. And it was philanthropy was the way of rebranding this negative externalities, right? And in that, what you're doing is thinking about social responsibility as individual responsibility, the individual responsibility of a CEO, the individual responsibility of a worker, to care for certain issues. And you don't look at it from a structural point of view. So social responsibility is then reframed as ad hoc individual responsibility. And philanthropy is a way of doing that, of giving on an individual basis. And really this philanthropy now has evolved to be CSR, corporate social responsibility. And then Edgar Villanueva has an amazing book that really looks at philanthropy and historically and make the connections with colonialism, right? And he makes the argument that we need to decolonize philanthropy and deconstruct and therefore decolonize philanthropy and think about CSR for what it is, which is connected to this idea that Arendt already in the 60s talked about, was this idea, the passion for compassion, right? And how it has roots in settler colonial relationships to invading indigenous land, to slavery, to this idea of civilizing these non-European others that in the end, this politics of pity that Hannah Arendt talks about is displacing a politics of justice, is displacing looking at the connection between charity in the global South given by the global North and the global North colonial and neo-colonial enterprises in the global South, which creates the need for charity in the first place. And Haiti is a good example of that, and how Haiti has been NGOized. Basically, the country's been stripped from any sense of common good managed by the state, and the common good is managed by little private enterprises and that manage charity and these small NGOs, and therefore there's no conception of the common good or public good. And Villanueva makes this case, is really the direct result of the French and US military colonial enterprises in Haiti, right? Which becomes then the case study for this sort of like global compassion when something bad happens, right? This then finally will connect it, or are connected to celebrity philanthropy, because really it's under the same conceptual umbrella. And oftentimes many TNCs will use a celebrity philanthropic endeavors in order to create or recreate their own CSR agendas, right? And the case of Angelina Jolie is one of those sort of like one of the most paradigmatic ones. An example that is probably one of the most visible ones, precisely because it is on one side is gendered, and then the other side is racialized. So Angelina Jolie is positioned as the ideal Western woman, right? And at the same time, she carries this white savior discourse that is linked to his cosmopolitan views of the world. And these cosmopolitan views of the world, it's really the argument that we are all one, that the world is one big family. And because of that, there is a universal appeal of humankind to do good. But what is hiding underneath is that this argument really is avoiding place-based politics of concern. That is localizing your political concern where you can act most effectively, which is, for instance, in your own country. And by displacing this politics of concern towards the cosmopolitan, universal humanitarian arena, you avoid your political responsibility where you live, basically, right? And that is, in essence, what CSR is really doing for these corporations. It allows them to avoid their responsibility in place, where they're based, the location that they're from, right? Or they're mostly from. And it even allows them to avoid the notion that they're from a place. But if you look historically to any TNC, you can clearly see that they were originally from a place. Therefore, they have a responsibility to that place. And then we end up talking about the question of taxation. And I pose the question, is really taxation the best way to enforce CSR? And it seems to me that it is, but I'm gonna leave you with a reflection by the historian Roger Bregman, and when he went to Davos. And with this, we'll finish.
This is my first time at Davos, and I find it quite a bewildering experience, to be honest. I mean, 1,500 private jets have flown in here to hear Sir David Attenborough speak about, how we're wrecking the planet. And I mean, I hear people talk in the language of participation and justice and equality and transparency. But then, I mean, almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance, right? And of the rich just not paying their fair share. I mean, it feels like I'm at a firefighters conference and no one's allowed to speak about water. I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, we can talk for a very long time about all these stupid philanthropy schemes. We can invite Bono once more, but come on, we gotta be talking about taxes. Yeah, exactly. That's it, taxes, taxes, taxes. All the rest is bullshit, in my opinion.
I actually came because I do believe we have an issue here. But I have to say, honestly, this is a very one-sided panel. Frankly, what people really want is a dignity of a job. I'd like for the panel to talk about beyond taxes, which every one of you have talked about. The only thing you've talked about in this whole panel on inequality, what can we really do to help solve inequality over time beyond taxes?
Let me tell you something. We're talking about jobs, but the quality of those jobs with poultry workers in the richest country in the world, the United States. Dolores, one woman we work with there, told us that she and her co-workers have to wear diapers to work because they are not allowed toilet breaks. This is in the richest country in the world. So don't tell me about low levels of unemployment. You are counting the wrong things. You're not counting dignity of people. You're counting exploited people.
I want to...
All right, so can we think of dignity beyond CSR and through taxes? I pose this question and these are the questions to you.